I learned to keep my voice on wire before I learned to keep my face still. At Kestrel Station, where the rails hung like harp strings between towers, and the wind sang through every bolt, nothing stayed private unless you made it difficult to listen to. Paper burned. Screens were watched. But a spool of recording wire looked like scrap, and scrap was everywhere. I could tuck a palm-sized reel into the hollow of my tool belt, and no inspector would blink. They searched for guns, for contraband fuel, for printed manifest codes. They did not search for a story. Kestrel Station was built above the salt flats on a lattice of old steel, a transit hub for the sky trains that ferried cargo and people between the high cities. From the platform you could see the flats glittering like crushed glass and, far beyond them, the mirage shimmer of the lowlands where the storms were born. The trains never touched the ground. They arrived on gust wheels and magnetic shoes, docking with a hum that made your teeth feel loose. The station lights were always amber, because white light reflected too hard off the salt and blinded the pilots. Everything at Kestrel looked like late afternoon, even at dawn. I was 17 when the registry hired me as a junior signal clerk. The job sounded dull, which meant it was safe. I sat in a booth lined with sound-damp foam and listened to the trains call in on the open band. I logged their identifiers, their docking times, their crew counts, their declared cargo, and their weather notes. Crosswind at 40, a pilot would say, or icing on the east struts, and I would stamp it into the day's ledger with a mechanical key that left my fingers smelling like ink and oil. The registry sold those ledgers to insurers and to the rail authority, and to anybody who wanted to predict risk. We told ourselves it was neutral information, like barometric pressure. We told ourselves a lot of things at Kestrel. The first time I recorded something I wasn't supposed to, it was by accident. A freight pilot named Harlan came in late with a hold full of sealed cylinders. He was talking too fast, voice clipped by panic, and behind his words I heard another voice, close to his mic, whispering numbers. Then a third sound, a click like a latch, and a soft thud that did not belong to any normal docking procedure. Harlan paused, swallowed, and said, "Registry, I need a quiet bay." Repeat, "Quiet bay." The official channel was recorded by station equipment, but those recordings belonged to the authority and could be revised, filed, or lost. I wanted to know what the whispering was. I wanted to know what the thud was. So, without thinking, I took the tiny reel from my belt and slipped it into my private recorder under the desk, the one I used to practice shorthand. I kept the wire running while I answered him in my calmest voice. "Proceed to Bay 7, marking you as weather delay." When the call ended, my supervisor, Mistress Corda, patted my shoulder like I'd done a good deed. "Good catch," she said. "We don't want the platform crowded if a load's delicate." She didn't ask what made it delicate. She didn't have to. We all knew certain cargo did not like witnesses. That night, in my rented cubby above the maintenance corridors, I played the wire back with the speaker pressed to my ear. Wire recordings were thin and metallic, like the sound was wrapped in foil, but you could pick out details if you listened twice. In the pause after the whispering, before Harlan begged for Bay 7, I heard breathing that wasn't his. A man's breath, shallow and controlled. Then a faint scrape of fabric and a single word, spoken too softly for the official record, "compliant." The next morning, Bay 7 was sealed behind a plastic curtain that read "quarantine." The freight was gone. Harlan did not file a departure. On the registry roster, his name was marked "transferred." That was the authority's favorite word. It meant you stopped asking. I should have erased my wire and gone back to stamping ledgers. I should have kept my curiosity like a pebble in my pocket, something you feel but don't show. Instead, I labeled the reel Bay 7 and hid it inside the casing of a broken lantern. I told myself it was only insurance. I told myself I would never need it. I had not yet learned that at Kestrel, what you kept became a debt, and debts collected interest. 2 weeks later, a mechanic named Juno knocked on my booth window during a lull. Juno worked the gust wheels and the magnetic shoes. Their hands were always bandaged, and they had a habit of smiling like they'd already lost and were still amused. They slid a folded rag under the glass. Inside the rag was a spool of wire identical to mine, except it had been wound onto a core made from a cut-down bolt. "Found this in a vent above Bay 7, Juno mouthed. My throat tightened. I stared at the spool until the letters on the next train's manifest blurred. I shouldn't have accepted it. I should have called Corda. I should have asked Juno why they were poking around a quarantined bay. But Juno's eyes were sharp, and there was something in their expression that made me think they were more afraid than they acted. I opened the booth door, took the rag, and tucked it into my belt with practiced nonchalance. Juno leaned close, voice low. "They're cleaning," they said. "Cleaning like you clean blood, not like you clean oil." "Who?" I asked, though I knew. Juno shrugged with their shoulder and not their chin, the station's old gesture for I won't say. "Authority men, night crew, unmarked." I swallowed. "Why bring it to me?" "Because you sit in the booth," Juno said. "You hear the voices. And because you don't look away when you hear something wrong." That last part wasn't true. I looked away all the time, but I wanted it to be true, and that made it dangerous. I didn't play Juno's spool immediately. I waited until the station quieted into its midnight hum, until the maintenance corridors cooled and the salt wind turned softer. Then I set my private recorder on the floor, fed the wire through its tiny guides, and listened. The first sound was a woman laughing. The laugh had a bright edge to it, like a bell struck with a nail. "Do you think they'll notice?" she asked. A man answered. His voice was smooth, trained for public address. "They notice what we allow." Then a clatter, and someone's shoes on metal. Running, a younger voice shouted, "No, no," and the woman laughed again, closer now, delighted. "Say the pledge," she cooed. "Say you consent." A thud, heavier this time. The wire hissed, and through it I heard the younger voice, muffled, forced. "I consent." The man's voice softened with satisfaction. "Compliant," he said, the same word I'd heard on my reel. My palms went slick. I stopped the recorder and sat in the dim, listening to my own heartbeat. The authority called its detainment process enrollment. They said they enrolled debtors into labor contracts, enrolled vagrants into resettlement programs, enrolled dissenters into rehabilitation. Everybody knew enrollment was a trapdoor. Nobody had proof. Proof was what the authority ate for breakfast. In the morning, while the station bustled with arrivals and departures, I did my job with a stiff smile and a careful cadence. I answered pilots. I stamped ledgers. I pretended my belt didn't contain a spool that could get me killed. Juno passed my booth twice, once with a crate of bearings and once with a tray of screws, and neither time did they look at me. That was how you survived at Kestrel. You acted like you were alone even in a crowd. It was Mistress Corda who broke my composure. She called me into her office at midday, which meant trouble. Her office was a glass box perched above the main hall, with a view of the amber platforms and the train shadows sliding like fish beneath the rails. Corda kept a fern on her desk, an indulgence in a place where water cost more than rent. She gestured for me to sit. Her smile was kind. "Mara," she said, "you're doing well." The use of my name made my skin prickle. "Thank you, mistress. There's an opportunity," she continued, tapping a file. "The authority wants to audit our call logs. They're impressed by your precision. They've asked for you to assist." I stared at the file, at the authority seal stamped in red wax. Assist. The word tasted like metal. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're young," Corda said smoothly, "and you're reliable, and because you don't have family ties that complicate clearances." I thought of my mother's face, the way she taught me to wind wire neatly and to speak only when needed. She was gone now, swallowed by a lowland storm years ago. Corda was right. I had nothing that made me difficult to move. My mouth went dry. "When?" I forced out. "Tonight," Corda said. "After last arrivals. A courier will escort you." I nodded because refusing was louder than a scream. That afternoon I found Juno in the maintenance bay pretending to argue with a turbine. They wiped grease from their fingers and raised an eyebrow as I approached. I didn't dare say anything obvious. The bay walls had ears, the bolts had eyes. So I spoke in the language of parts. "Do you have any spare coils?" I asked. "Thin gauge. For a recorder." Juno understood. Their jaw tightened. "Who's asking?" "Corda," I said, and watched the word land like a wrench dropped on a toe. "Authority audit." Juno exhaled through their teeth. "That's not an audit," they murmured. "That's a mouth." "Then I need teeth," I whispered back. Juno disappeared behind a rack of tools and returned with a small tin. Inside were 3 reels of wire, each wound tight and clean, and a strip of black cloth that smelled faintly of cloves. "For your pocket," Juno said, touching the cloth. "It muffles the click." "Click?" I asked. "The click of fear," Juno said, and their smile flickered, humorless. "They can hear it." I didn't understand, but I took the tin. At dusk, when the station lights deepened to orange and the rails seemed to glow, I returned to my cubby. I opened the broken lantern where I'd hidden my first reel. I took out the Bay 7 wire and Juno's wire and my spare reels. I laid them on the floor like offerings. Then I did something my mother would have called stupid bravery. I copied them. Wire could be duplicated if you ran 2 recorders in tandem, one playing and one recording. The copy lost some clarity, but a copy could be hidden somewhere else. A copy could be mailed. A copy could outlive you. I spent 2 hours making copies, my hands trembling only a little. I labeled the duplicates with harmless words, weather, inventory, train song, and tucked them into places no authority man would bother with, inside the hollow core of a broom handle, beneath a loose tile by the communal sink, sewn into the lining of my boot. I kept the originals in my belt because if I was searched, they would find something anyway. Better to control what they found. When the last arrivals were logged and the main hall quieted, a courier met me at the registry door. He wore an authority jacket without insignia. His face was blank in the way of a man who practiced being forgettable. "Signal clerk Mara," he said. "This way." He led me through corridors I'd never taken, past locked doors and vents that breathed cold air, down a stairwell that smelled of bleach. We emerged into a lower level, where the station's bones showed. Exposed girders, dripping pipes, the deep thrum of the power spine. At the end of the corridor was a door with a new keypad. The courier pressed his thumb to a sensor. The door clicked open. Inside was a room that made my stomach drop. It was a listening room, like my booth but larger, lined with foam and cables. A long table held recorders of every kind. Digital decks, wax cylinders, wire reels, even a battered cassette player that looked out of place and old. Behind the table sat 2 authority officers and a woman in a gray suit with hair cut sharp at her jaw. The woman stood. "Clerk Mara," she said warmly. "I'm Director Etta Sol. Thank you for coming." Her name meant nothing to me, but her voice did. It had the bell-bright laugh I'd heard on Juno's wire, softened for politeness. My throat went tight. Etta gestured to a chair. "Sit. We'll be brief." The officers watched me like dogs waiting for a command. I sat carefully, keeping my hands visible. "We're reviewing anomalies," Etta said, sliding a folder toward me. Inside were transcripts of train calls, with sections highlighted in yellow, pauses, static bursts, overlapping voices. "You log weather notes," she continued, "but weather is a language. It says more than it seems." I forced myself to look at the paper, not at her. "I record what pilots report," I said. "Of course," Etta said, "and you do it well. That's why we're recruiting you." My pulse stumbled. "Recruiting?" Etta smiled. "Enrollment, if you prefer the old word. But you're not being punished. You're being promoted." One of the officers placed a wire recorder on the table. "We'd like you to help us decode hidden transmissions," Etta said. "Smugglers use weather codes. Dissidents hide messages in static. We need ears trained for detail." My mouth was dry. "Why not your own staff?" I asked. "Careful. Because our staff hears what they expect," Etta said. "You hear what happens." She leaned forward. "We also understand you have hobbies, private recordings, keepsakes. We don't mind. In fact, we admire initiative." Ice spread through my limbs. They knew. Maybe not what I had, but they knew I had something. Etta tapped the recorder. "Here's a sample," she said. "Listen and tell us what you hear." She flipped a switch, and the room filled with wire-thin sound. A train call, familiar cadence, the hiss of the open band. Then, underneath, a second layer, faint, rhythmic, like someone tapping a code on metal. I listened, focusing the way my mother taught me. The taps were not random, they were spaced like letters. Someone had used the station's own signal band to send a message inside the noise. "It's not weather," I said slowly. "It's a pattern, a handshake." Etta's eyes gleamed. "Good," she said. "Now tell us what it says." My mind raced. If I decoded it, I would prove my value and tighten their grip. If I failed, they would suspect I was hiding skill. I needed a third path. I needed to sound useful but incomplete. "It says, open." I lied, choosing a word that could mean nothing. "Open line. Like a test." Etta nodded as if satisfied. "Excellent. You'll start tomorrow. We'll arrange your quarters and your clearance. And you'll sign a consent form tonight." One officer slid a paper across the table. The form was thick, stamped, full of clauses. I saw words like voluntary and waiver and compliance. My stomach turned. "I'd like to read it," I said. "Of course," Etta said, and her smile sharpened. "Take your time." I read enough to know it was a trap in polite handwriting. It granted the authority rights to my labor, my recordings, my testimony, my movement. It included a clause that allowed them to revise official records, for security purposes. It included a clause that said any private recordings in my possession were now authority property. They wanted my wires. They wanted my proof. They wanted my voice. I looked up. "If I sign," I said carefully, "my recordings become yours." Etta's gaze didn't flicker. "Everything becomes ours," she said softly. "That's how a station remains safe." Behind her warmth was the same delight I'd heard on the wire, the pleasure of making someone say yes. My fingers hovered over the pen. Then I remembered Juno's words, "Cleaning like you clean blood." I remembered Harlan's panic and the whisper and the thud. I remembered the younger voice forced to consent. And I remembered my mother winding wire in a cramped room, telling me that stories mattered only if they could be played. I took the pen. I signed. The ink dried fast. The officer collected the form, and Etta stood. "Welcome," she said. "You'll be escorted." The courier led me back up through corridors, his steps measured. I kept my face still. I kept my voice neutral when I thanked him at the registry door. I walked to my booth, gathered my things, and walked to my cubby with the steady gait of someone who had just been handed a better life. Only when my door clicked shut did I allow myself to breathe. Signing had bought me time. It had also put a timer in my chest. I sat on the floor and pulled the copies from their hiding places. I laid them out again. I couldn't keep them all. Too many places meant too many risks. I needed one path out, one delivery that could not be intercepted by a single search. Kestrel Station had one honest route: the lanterns. Every night, the station released lantern drones into the wind. They were small, buoyant capsules, with a steady glow, carrying maintenance reports and light-coded signals to the outlying towers. The drones were simple, old tech, considered beneath the authorities' attention. They were also, if you knew their schedules, predictable. I found the broken lantern on my shelf, the one that had hidden Bay 7. I pried open its casing and replaced the cracked battery with a fresh one from Juno's tin. I wrapped the wire copies in black cloth, muffling the click I didn't yet understand, and tucked them inside. Then I resealed the lantern and scratched a new serial number into its base so it would pass as station property. At midnight, I slipped into the maintenance corridor carrying the lantern like any other clerk running an errand. The corridor was empty except for the hum of the power spine. At the drone bay, a rack of lantern capsules waited to be loaded. A young night tech yawned and barely looked up as I approached. "Replacement for Tower 12, I said, using the code phrase I'd heard mechanics use. He nodded, took my lantern, and snapped it into the rack without inspecting it. The system beeped and accepted it as one of its own. My heart hammered. I left without running. Back in my cubby, I sat on my bed and stared at my hands until the tremor eased. Somewhere above, my lantern would be released into the wind, drifting toward Tower 12, then onward along the relay chain to the far towers, where the lantern reports were archived in a dusty room no authority director visited. I had a friend in that room, an old archivist who owed my mother a favor. If the lantern reached him, the wires would be safe. If. The next morning, I reported to the listening room as instructed. The room smelled of new foam and old secrets. Etta greeted me like a colleague. The officers watched like guards. My new desk had a wire decoder and a set of headphones so padded they looked like a luxury. "Today we'll start with simple patterns," Etta said. "Then we'll move to live calls." She slid me another sample. I listened, pretending focus, while my mind ran ahead. If my lantern failed, I would need another route. If my lantern succeeded, I needed to stay alive long enough for the archive to do something with the proof. But archives were quiet. The authority was loud. Proof alone wasn't enough. It needed an audience. At midday, during a break, I asked to use the restroom. An officer escorted me to a corridor and stood outside the door. I washed my hands slowly, then opened my boot lining and checked the hidden reel there. It was still warm against my skin. One copy, my last backup. I felt its presence like a heartbeat. Back in the room, Etta began the live call session. She tuned the receiver to the open band, and a pilot's voice crackled through. "Kestrel, this is Windlark 7, approaching on North Rail." I instinctively reached for my ledger, then remembered I was no longer logging. I was listening. Etta leaned close. "Do you hear anything beneath it?" she asked. I listened. Beneath the pilot's voice was the ordinary hiss of atmosphere, but there was also a faint secondary tone, a rhythmic dip in the static. A hidden transmission. My stomach clenched. "It's there," I said. "Decode it," Etta said, eyes bright. I focused, counting the dips, mapping them to letters. The message formed slowly in my mind. Not safe. Authority listens. Bury wire. My breath caught. Someone out there was warning us. Dissidents, smugglers, or something else. They knew the authorities' new program. They were trying to protect whoever could hear. Etta watched me. I had to choose. Deliver the message to her, betraying its sender, or lie again, risking suspicion. A third path. Give her enough to seem accurate, but alter it so the sender was protected. It says, "Not safe. Authority." I began, then paused as if the rest was garbled. Something about wire. It's messy. Etta's smile tightened. "Messy how?" "Signal overlap," I said, the lie smooth now. "The pilot's mic is clipping it." Etta studied me. Then she nodded, too slowly. "We'll try another." The next call carried another hidden message, then another. Over hours, I realized the open band had become a battlefield. The authority hid its enrollment operations inside official traffic. Someone else hid warnings inside the same noise. And I, sitting in the middle, was a sieve that could feed either side. At the end of the day, Etta dismissed me with a pleasant tone. "You're learning quickly," she said. "We'll make you invaluable." As I left, an officer stepped close and murmured, "Keep your hobbies professional." His breath smelled of mint. His eyes were flat. That night, in my cubby, I listened to my own wire recordings, not for the authority but for myself. I played Bay 7 again and again until the word compliant felt like it was carved into my skull. I played Juno's spool until the laughter made my stomach twist. Then, on impulse, I did something reckless. I recorded a new wire. I spoke softly into the mic. "If you are listening," I said, "if you are the one hiding warnings in static, know this. I have proof. I will not give it to them. Tell me where to send it. Tell me how to make it heard." I rewound the wire and played it back. My voice sounded small, but it was there, a thread. The next day, during live calls, I slipped my own transmission into the band. It was a trick my mother had taught me when we lived in a tower that could only communicate by bouncing signals off the rails. You could piggyback a message on the registry's acknowledgement tone, like humming under someone else's song. I did it once, then twice. No one reacted. Etta was busy, officers bored. The open band hissed. At midday, on the 5th call, something changed. After the pilot finished reporting crosswinds, there was a brief, deliberate pause in the static, as if the air itself held its breath. Then a hidden tone, clearer than any I'd heard, tapped out a response. "Tower 12, archive room. Do not trust Juno." My blood went cold. Do not trust Juno. Juno had given me wire. Juno had warned me. Juno had helped me hide copies. Juno had been my only ally in the station's guts. My mind raced. The warning could be genuine or a trap. It could be the authority, testing my reactions. It could be a dissident faction, trying to isolate me. Or it could be the truth. Juno could be an informer playing a long game. I kept my face blank. I nodded at Etta when she asked what I heard and lied. "Nothing," I said. "Just weather." But inside, a new fear unfurled, sharp and bright. That evening, instead of going straight to my cubby, I followed Juno at a distance. They moved through maintenance corridors with a familiar swagger, nodding to techs, slipping through doors. I kept to shadows, pretending to check conduit labels. I told myself I was being careful, not paranoid. Juno reached a door near Bay 7, the quarantined area. They paused, looked around, and knocked twice. A panel slid open. A voice spoke from behind it, low and smooth. I recognized it. The man from the wire. The one who said, "Compliant." Juno leaned in, and though I couldn't hear their words, I saw their posture change. Shoulders squared, chin lifted. Like someone reporting, my stomach lurched. I backed away before the panel slid shut. Back in my cubby, I sat with my boot reel in my hands and the warning echoing in my head. Don't trust Juno. The memory of their smile felt like a blade's edge now. I needed to reach Tower 12's archive room before the authority did. If my lantern had arrived, the archivist would already have the wires. If it hadn't, maybe the wires were still in the drone relay. Vulnerable. Either way, the archive was now the center of the storm. But getting to Tower 12 meant leaving Kestrel Station. Clerks didn't leave without clearance. And now I was under enrollment. Every hallway had eyes. On the third day of my new work, the opportunity came wrapped in routine. Etta announced a field test. "We're going to observe a docking in person," she said. "A cargo transfer with suspected code traffic. Clerk Mara, you'll accompany us." I forced myself to nod. Field test meant platform. Platform meant wind. Wind meant lantern routes and drone bays. Wind meant the possibility of slipping away in plain sight, because on a platform everyone moved fast and nobody wanted to get blown off the edge. The docking was scheduled for late afternoon. A train called Ashwing 9 approached with an unusual clearance request. Etta's eyes glittered with interest. "Watch," she told me. "The smugglers always show themselves when they think we're not looking." We went to Platform 3, where the rails sang and the amber lights cast long shadows. The air smelled of ozone and salt. Authority officers stationed themselves at intervals. Etta stood near the docking clamps, composed as a statue. I stood beside her, my heart hammering, feeling the boot reel against my ankle. Ashwing 9 arrived with a low hum. Its gust wheels spun, throwing dust into the air. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thunk. Crew members in gray coveralls moved to open the cargo hatch. Etta lifted a hand. "Hold," she called. The crew froze. A tall man stepped forward, visor down. "Director," he said. He knew her. That alone made my skin crawl. Etta smiled. "Routine," she said. "We're listening today." As she spoke, I heard something else. A faint clicking, like tiny stones hitting glass. It came from above, from the lantern drone bay's direction. I looked up and saw a cluster of lantern capsules being released early, their amber lights bobbing into the wind like a swarm of fireflies. That wasn't scheduled. Someone had changed the release time. A signal, a distraction, or a warning. Etta's gaze followed mine. "Pretty," she said lightly. "The station still clings to its quaint habits." But one of the officers stiffened, hand to his earpiece. "Director," he murmured. "We're getting chatter. Tower 12 line is active." Etta's smile thinned. "Active how?" "Archive room," the officer said. "They're requesting a security team. They claim they received unregistered materials." My stomach dropped. The lantern had arrived. The archivist had opened it. And now, instead of hiding it quietly, he'd flagged it. Unless he'd been forced. Unless someone else had opened it first. Etta turned to me, eyes bright with triumph. "See?" she said softly. "Hobbies become liabilities." She gestured. "Take her," she told the officers. Two hands grabbed my arms. In that instant, fear clicked inside me. A hard sound behind my ribs. I understood Juno's cloth. The click was the tiny involuntary catch in your breath. The flinch your body made before your mind could mask it. The authority listened for it. They listened for the sound of surrender. I forced my breath smooth. I did not struggle. I let them escort me off the platform as if it were routine. Inside my head, plans shattered and reformed. They brought me not to the listening room, but to Bay 7. The plastic curtain was gone. The bay smelled of bleach and cold metal. In the center stood a table with a wire recorder and my broken lantern, pried open. The black cloth lay beside it like a dead wing. My reels were on the table, exposed. Etta stood opposite me, calm as ever. Juno leaned against a pillar behind her, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "I'm disappointed," Etta said. "You were almost useful." My mouth went numb. I looked at Juno. They met my gaze without flinching. "You brought the wire to me," I said, voice steady despite my pulse. "Why?" Juno's smile flickered. "Because you needed to believe someone was on your side," they said quietly. Etta laughed, bell-bright, delighted. "Exactly," she said. "Belief is the cheapest leash." The betrayal burned, but beneath it a strange clarity settled. The authority had been running a program of bait and harvest. They let rumors of enrollment spread, let hints of proof circulate, then watched who tried to collect it. They used mechanics like Juno as nets. Etta picked up my Bay 7 reel. "This," she said, "is the problem with independent recorders. They make people think reality is a fixed thing." She dropped the reel into a small metal bin and poured solvent over it. The wire hissed, dissolving. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. I still had the boot reel. They hadn't searched my ankle, perhaps because they thought they already had everything, perhaps because they underestimated how desperate a clerk could be. Etta turned to the recorder on the table. "We'll correct the record," she said. "You'll state that you fabricated these tapes, that you staged voices, that you sought attention. You'll sign another form. Then you'll be enrolled into a quiet job where you won't cause confusion." I looked at the mic. I looked at the officers. I turned to Juno. I remembered the hidden messages in static. I remembered the warning. Tower 12. Archive room. I remembered the second part. Do not trust Juno. Whoever sent it had known this outcome. Maybe they had a plan for the boot reel. Maybe they had a plan for me. I took a slow breath. "If I record a confession," I said, "you can play it to anyone." Etta's eyes gleamed. "Yes. And you can also edit it," I added, voice mild. "For security." Etta shrugged. "Naturally. So the only record that matters is the one nobody can revise," I said. Etta tilted her head. "And what would that be?" I met her gaze. "A live broadcast," I said. For the first time, Etta's expression tightened. "We control the band," she said. "Not all of it," I replied. "Not the wind." She laughed, but there was less delight in it now. "You're poetic," she said. "Record the confession." An officer shoved me toward the chair. I sat, hands on the table. The mic was inches from my mouth. I leaned in and began to speak. Not a confession, but a weather report in the registry's official cadence. "Kestrel Station to all inbound trains," I said, voice clear. "Crosswind at 40. Visibility low. Docking risk increased. Recommend delay." Etta frowned. "Stop," she snapped, but my words were already out, and the station's open band receiver, wired into Bay 7 for tests, had already transmitted my voice. It was subtle, a feature installed for training decoders. Etta had used it to feed samples into the network. She hadn't expected me to use it too. I continued, shifting my tone by a hair, embedding the hidden taps my mother taught me. A code inside the cadence. "Repeat," I said. "Authority detainment in Bay 7. Enrollment conducted under false consent. Evidence stored on wire." An officer lunged, reaching for the switch. I slapped my palm on the table hard, making a sharp thud that spiked the mic. Then I did the only thing I could. I kicked off my boot. The boot slid across the floor. The hidden reel inside its lining popped loose and rolled, shining faintly in the amber light. Juno moved fast, but I was faster by one heartbeat. I grabbed the reel, yanked it free, and before anyone could stop me, I jammed it into the table recorder, splicing it into the live line. The room filled with thin, metallic sound. My mother's lesson, my earlier plea, then the recordings themselves, raw and unedited. Harlan's panic, the whispering, the thuds, the forced consent, the bell-bright laughter, the word compliant. Etta's face went pale with fury. "Cut it," she shouted. An officer slammed switches, but wire was stubborn. The recorder's feed fought back, resisting the cut like a fish against a net. In those seconds, the open band carried the unvarnished sound out into the station, into pilots' headsets, into the registry booths, into anyone tuned to the weather channel. I heard, faintly, through the bay walls, a ripple of voices from the platforms, shouts, confusion, a pilot swearing, someone dropping a crate, the station reacting like a body suddenly pricked. Etta grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. Pain flashed, bright and clean. "You think this will save you?" she hissed. I met her eyes. "No," I said, "but it will make you louder." The officer finally found the master cut. The feed died. Silence slammed into the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Etta released my hair and smoothed her suit as if the violence had been a wrinkle. "Lock her," she said calmly. "We'll rewrite the band logs. We'll claim sabotage. We'll claim a smuggler attack." She looked at Juno. "Clean it," she added. Juno nodded, face blank. The officers dragged me away, down corridors, into a small cell with a window that showed only salt-lit darkness. They locked the door. The station hum continued as if nothing had happened. I sat on the cell's narrow bench and listened to my own breathing, waiting for the click of despair. It came, a tiny catch, and I let it pass without shame. I had done what I could. The authority would spin it, They would muddy it. They would say the wire was fake, unless someone else had heard the hidden code in my weather cadence. Evidence stored on wire. Unless someone else knew how to take a recording and turn it into an accusation that could not be dismissed. Hours passed. Then, near dawn, footsteps approached. The door's panel slid open. A face appeared. Not an officer, but a station tech I barely recognized, eyes wide and frantic. "Clerk Mara," he whispered. There's a tower call. Tower 12. In the archive room. They say the wind is full of your voice." My heart stumbled. "What do they mean?" I asked. He swallowed. "Pilots are replaying it," he said. "They're looping it. They're broadcasting it back. Over and over. On every spare frequency. They say they won't dock until the authority answers. They say the rails won't carry silence anymore." I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw the open band as a sea of hiss, and within it my wire-thin proof, echoing, multiplied by stubborn hands. The tech leaned closer. "They also said..." He hesitated. "They said a mechanic sabotaged the enrollment net. They found Juno's access logs. They found proof Juno planted wires. The pilots are furious. The registry clerks are refusing to stamp ledgers." He looked at me, and in his fear there was a spark of something else. Hope. The dangerous kind. "What do we do?" I opened my eyes. My scalp still burned where Etta had yanked my hair. My hands were scraped. My wire reels were gone, but my voice had escaped. And voices, once loose, were hard to catch. "Tell Tower 12, I said slowly, choosing each word like a bolt that had to hold weight, to archive everything. "Tell every pilot to record the authorities' denials. Tell every clerk to log the pauses, the edits, the missing names. Tell them to treat the station like evidence." The tech nodded, swallowing hard. "And you?" I smiled, small and fierce. "I'll wait," I said. "I've been doing that my whole life." He slid the panel shut and left. In the cell, the hum of the station seemed different. No longer a lullaby, but a chorus of machines straining against a script. Somewhere above, amber lights burned, rails sang. Wind pushed against steel. People listened to static and found meaning. I pressed my ear to the wall as if I could hear the band itself. In the faintest vibration, I imagined the loop of my wire playing again, and beneath it, like a new layer, the tapping of other hands. Not safe. "Authority is listening. Hide the wire." Then, brighter now, another message. "We hear you. Keep breath steady." I laughed once, quietly, not bell-bright, but real. The authority had taught us that consent was a word you could force from a throat. The wind was teaching us something else, that a record, once shared, could become a weapon, even if it was thin and metallic and imperfect, that a story, kept hard to erase, could outlast the hands that tried to dissolve it. Outside my cell, Kestrel Station woke to an amber dawn that looked like late afternoon, as always, but for the first time since I'd arrived, the light felt less like a disguise and more like a warning. Everything was visible if enough people decided to look. On the second day of my lockup, Director Soul came alone. The officers stayed outside, as if the cell air might stain their uniforms. Etta carried a cup of water like a peace offering, though the cup was station tin and the water smelled faintly of chlorine. She set it on the floor and crouched so our eyes were level. "You made a mess," she said, voice calm. "But messes can be cleaned." I stared at the cup. I didn't reach for it. "You dissolved my reel," I said. "I dissolved a piece of wire," she corrected. "Not your intent. Intent is harder." She smiled slightly. "You wanted an audience. Congratulations. You have one. The pilots are noisy." "Pilots don't dock," I said. "Cargo rots. Schedules break. Money screams. That's not noise. That's leverage." Etta's gaze sharpened. "Leverage works both ways," she said. "They're up there in the wind. You're down here. I can keep you down here until your voice becomes an old rumor. Then you'd have to quiet the band," I replied. Etta tapped the wall gently with 2 fingers. Tap, tap. The same measured cadence as a hidden code. "We will," she said. "We've already begun rerouting frequencies. We'll label the recordings as smuggler propaganda. We'll release edited versions. We'll show a confession in your voice." I felt my gut twist, but I kept my breath even. "You can't forge the click," I said before I could stop myself. Etta's eyes narrowed. "The click?" I waited a beat, regretting the slip. Then I forced a shrug. The hesitation people hear when they're scared, I said. It's in your enrollment tapes. You can edit words, but you can't edit the body. Etta's expression softened, almost admiring. You really are trained, she said. Your mother did excellent work. The mention of my mother hit like a fist, but I kept my face still. Leave her out of it. Etta sighed as if indulging a child. Fine, let's talk about you. She leaned closer. I can offer you a deal, a real promotion, a name on a door, a room with white light. You'll help us shape the narrative. You'll say the tapes were misused by a rogue unit. You'll name a scapegoat. In exchange, you walk out. I pictured walking out under amber light, while others disappeared in Bay 7. I pictured my voice used to smooth the edges of the authorities' blade. The thought made my skin crawl. No, I said quietly. Etta's smile thinned. Stubborn, she murmured. Then you'll stay. And the station will suffer. And the pilots will eventually want their paychecks more than your principals. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they've wanted a reason for years. Maybe all they needed was one unedited sound. Etta stared at me for a long moment, then stood. You're betting on strangers, she said. Strangers are weather. Unreliable. She left, locking my cell in her wake. The cup of water remained on the floor like a small, shining question. I didn't drink it until hours later, when my mouth cracked, because survival was not consent. That afternoon the station trembled with a different kind of noise. Not the hum of power spines, but the distant clanging of tools on rail housings, the kind of rhythmic protest mechanics used when they wanted management to hear them. Tap, tap, tap. Not code this time, but a drum. Through the vent I caught snatches of shouted arguments, the word enrollment repeated like a curse. And then, surprisingly, laughter rough, disbelieving laughter, like people realizing the monster had been wearing a mask made of paper. Late that night, the panel slid open again. This time it was not a nervous tech, but the archivist from Tower 12. Face lined and dusty, eyes fierce. His name was Oren, and he smelled of lantern oil. 2 pilots flanked him, both in flight jackets, both with microphones clipped to their collars like badges. Behind them, in the corridor, a handful of registry clerks stood shoulder to shoulder, including Mistress Corda, pale and shaking. Oren held up a small wire reel between finger and thumb. Your lantern, he said. Clever hiding place. Terrible labeling. He smiled grimly, but we got it. We copied it. Twice. Then we sent it back down the relay chain on every lantern drone the authority forgot to inventory. One of the pilots leaned forward. We've got the loop running, she said, voice hoarse. Every crew on every rail. We're swapping copies at docking points like it's fuel. She glanced at the corridor, and the mechanics have locked Bay 7 from the inside. My breath caught. How are you here? I whispered. Oren shrugged. The authority can lock doors, he said. But they still need trains. We ask nicely. The wind carried us. Corda stepped forward, eyes wet. Mara, she said, and her voice broke. I'm sorry. I thought keeping my head down kept the station safe. I thought compliance was a kind of weather. I was wrong. I searched her face, looking for the old smoothness. It was gone. She looked small, human. They're going to crush you, I said softly. They'll have to reach us first, the pilot replied. She tapped her mic, and they can't reach everyone at once. Oren lifted the reel again. We need you to authenticate, he said. Not with a signature, with skill. The authority is releasing edits. We need someone who can explain, in plain terms, how the edits work. We need to teach the whole station to listen for seams. My heart hammered. This was the audience I'd wanted. Not a crowd consuming a scandal, but a crowd learning a method. I can do that, I said. Oren nodded. Then come. The pilot's hands were gentle when they helped me out of the cell. My legs shook as I stepped into the corridor, not from weakness but from the shock of open space. The clerks parted to let me pass. A mechanic in grease-streaked overalls offered me a coat. I pulled it on and felt, absurdly, like I was putting on armor. We moved through the station in a loose knot. Not hiding but not announcing either. The corridors were busier than I'd ever seen them at night. Mechanics carrying bolt cutters, clerks with clipboards full of copied logs, pilots in helmets with their visors up, faces exposed. People were speaking openly. The authorities' greatest trick had been to make speech feel like a crime. At the central hall, under the amber lights, A crowd had gathered around a makeshift broadcast rig assembled from spare radios and a platform mic. Someone had hung a sheet behind it as a backdrop, and on the sheet they'd painted a single word in black. Listen. No logos, no slogans, just an instruction. Oren pushed me toward the mic. The crowd quieted. I saw faces I recognized from manifests and maintenance shifts, and faces I'd never seen because they'd lived in the station's blind spots. The air smelled of sweat and ozone, and something like rain that never reached the salt flats. I swallowed and leaned toward the mic. It felt different than my booth mic, less insulated, more honest. My name is Mara, I began, and the fact of saying it aloud made my chest tighten. I worked the registry. I recorded wire because wire is hard to erase. The authority wants you to believe recordings can be dismissed as tricks. They can be edited, yes, but edits leave fingerprints. Your ears can learn them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone raised a hand. How do we know you're not editing too? A man called, not hostile, just wary. Good question, I said. Trust is not a gift. It's a method. I gestured to the rig. We'll play 2 versions, the authorities version and the raw version. I'll show you where the cuts are. You'll hear them. Then you'll be able to hear them anywhere. We played the authority edit first. It was smoother, shorter, with long silences replaced by steady hum. Edda's people had clipped the thuds, trimmed the forced breaths, removed the laugh's sharp edge. They'd even inserted a line in my voice, stitched from my weather cadence, saying something about maintenance error. It might have fooled a casual listener. Then we played the raw wire. The crowd flinched at the thud, at the muffled "I consent," at the laugh that sounded like a bell struck wrong. In the raw, my own earlier transmission was audible too, panic hidden under official phrasing. The room felt like it was holding its breath. I pointed out the seams, how the authorities' hum had a different grain than the station's natural hiss, how their silences were too clean, how the breath before compliant was cut in the edit because it revealed fear. They can change words, I said, voice steady, but they can't perfectly imitate the body. The body has rhythm. It has involuntary sound. Learn that rhythm. Teach it. People nodded, faces hardening. A mechanic wiped their eyes with a greasy sleeve. A pilot clenched her jaw. A clerk scribbled notes like their life depended on it. Somewhere above, rails sang as a train arrived and did not dock, hovering in a holding pattern like a question mark. Edda chose that moment to appear. She stepped onto the edge of the crowd, flanked by officers, her gray suit immaculate, her smile bright as a blade. "This is unauthorized," she called. "This is interference with transit operations. Disperse." No one moved. The crowd's stillness was heavier than any shout. Edda's gaze landed on me. "Mara," she said warmly, as if we were in a meeting room, "you're frightening people with noise. Come back inside. We'll correct this." I lifted the mic. My hands shook, but my breath stayed smooth. "Director Soul," I said, and my voice carried. "Do you still believe consent is a word you can force?" Edda laughed, bell bright, and the crowd heard it with new ears. A ripple went through them. Not fear this time, but recognition. Her laughter was on the wire. Her laughter was the fingerprint she could not erase. Edda's smile faltered for